the National Endowment for Democracy. That's the regime change arm of US government, sponsored by the US government, toppling designated enemies and working with violent and anti-democratic actors.
It's a fanatical political organization that uses fear and manipulation like COVID hysteria, like the hoax of global warming, to really facilitate people thinking that somehow they're the saviors, but really all you're doing is helping them accomplish their goal, which really is a global public-private fascist movement and fusion of big government, big tech, big money to create a technocratic ruling elite, which conveniently is them. And really, Laura, if you want to look at a different way, too, with the World Economic Forum, they want to create feudalism 2.0, in which we are serfs and they are the lords ruling over us. You'll have nothing and be happy is one of the things that comes out of Davos. That's what they're aiming for. They're aiming for feudalism in which we are serfs and we should be happy that they are ruling over us.
The National Endowment for Democracy. There are a lot of so-called NGOs being funded by the National Endowment for Democracy, and when you point out their U.S. government funding, one of the things that they try to say in defense is that it has the word democracy in its name. It's the National Endowment for Democracy. Do you have something against self-determination, people determining things for themselves rather than living under a dictatorship where others decide for them? And the ultimate irony of this is that the National Endowment for Democracy, even though it does have the word democracy in its name, does not stand for any of this. It actually stands for doing the exact opposite.
We're talking here about psychology. It's like, how can it be that in our own group, the secret services are carrying out terrorism? And in Europe, it's Gladio. And in the US, for instance, it's the assassination of Kennedy in 1963. I'm in my other book on the US, I've written that I'm totally convinced that the story with Lee Harvey Oswald is just a bogus story. It's not true. This is still what you read on Wikipedia, that Lee Harvey Oswald killed John F. Kennedy in 1963 in Dallas, and he's just a lonely, crazy guy. That's it. That's the level of Wikipedia that you get. But people who go deeper, see it as a coup d'etat in the United States by the CIA. The CIA had people who killed Kennedy. But now, people listening to us or listening to this conversation might think, no, this guy is going a bit too far. I mean, if the CIA killed Kennedy, then why was the CIA not closed down? I mean, how can this be? And then we talk about the deep state, and we talk about covert action operations. And I think we are now in a process where people realize that covert action operation exists. But they have existed for many years. I mean, when the CIA was created in 1947, there was always a department which was doing analysis. Like Ray McGovern, for instance, is an excellent guy, isn't he? He's a former CIA, and they do analysis. So they are very much like university professors. They speak many languages, they travel the world, they read a lot, and they're interested in many topics. But then there's also the paramilitary guys who carry out covert operations. And these guys, they have never been. There was no scrutiny of what the CIA did. There was the Church investigation in the mid 1970s, but ever since there was nothing. And so it's very hard for researchers to discuss Operation Gladio.
As you all know, the United States runs around the world trying to topple regimes and put in their place democratically elected regimes. And for almost all of you, me included, it's hard to be against promoting democracy. We all love democracy. But when the United States talks about democracy promotion, that means toppling your regime.
We have to understand the US does not just project power around the globe militarily. They have this very well-honed, massive network of political interference centered around organizations like the National Endowment for Democracy. They build up political opposition groups inside targeted countries, and they build up a whole network around them, not just the political opposition party and the leaders, but also media, legal organizations, polling organizations. It is a state within a state. This is the process the US uses to politically capture targeted nations all around the globe. It's very important that we understand how the US is doing this.
You can be democratic at home and ruthlessly imperial abroad. The most violent country in the world since 1950 has been the United States. It's been by far involved
Jeffrey,
in more,
stop
wait a
now.
minute, in more
Let's
wars.
Jeffrey, I'm your moderator, and it's enough.
The US has many ways of waging war. And I've shown this in a previous video about multi-domain warfare. This is the target nation. Let's just say that this is the US. It says political here because all of these domains are actually domains of a political nature. Clausewitz once said that warfare is a continuation of politics by additional means. And these are the additional means. And the United States military does this part conventional, covert. Sometimes they get involved in cyber and information. Sometimes they're even involved in enforcing economic measures or intelligence, sometimes even diplomatic. But then there's another branch of the American government that handles all of these other domains. Things like the legal system, sociocultural, also educational, which isn't listed here, the criminal system, an extension of the legal system, energy, infrastructure, all of this. The National Endowment for Democracy interferes in absolutely all of this. They wage war against a targeted nation across all of these domains, all of the domains that the US military does not. And this was something that the CIA used to do. And then this responsibility was handed off over to the National Endowment for Democracy. And that's not me just saying that. That is something you could read about in the New York Times. Missionaries for Democracy, US Aid for Global Pluralism. And down here it says, the program, they're talking about the National Endowment for Democracy. The program resembles the aid given by the Central Intelligence Agency in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s to bolster pro-American political groups. But that aid was clandestine, and subsequent congressional investigations found often used planted newspaper articles and other forms of intentionally misleading information. Well, the NED does all of that and much more. What the NED was whitewashing what the CIA was doing and trying to make it more presentable. But at this point, people are starting to catch on. Social media is how you control information space. If you have a country, you have an army protecting your land borders, a navy protecting your shores, you have an air force protecting your airspace, but you have a foreign US-based social media company utterly controlling your information space in the 21st century. If you are not protecting your information space, if you don't control it, you are not protecting your country at all. You could have all the tanks in the world. If the US can come in through your social media and they can poison everyone against their own country, who's going to man those tanks? Who's going to fly the fighter planes to defend your airspace? They could take your whole society, divide it, turn it against itself through information space. Information space is another sovereign domain that every nation needs to protect. You're right, China does that. They have their own social media platforms, Western platforms that have been abused in China. They have been banned. That's why they're banned, because they were stirring up literal terrorism where people were being killed using Facebook and Twitter.
The National Endowment for Democracy. That's the regime change arm of US government, sponsored by the US government, toppling designated enemies and working with violent and anti-democratic actors.
If people think like, well, what the NED is doing is not all that bad, funding groups overseas, promoting democracy, promoting opposition groups, promoting media involved in a nation's internal political affairs, organizing petitions to rewrite a nation's constitution. If people think that's not bad, just ask yourself this: would the US tolerate another nation doing that to them?
Blind actors do want to use social media to influence our elections.
Mr. Congressman,
and it should be a bipartisan goal. No, you don't get to ask questions here.
Okay.
It should be a bipartisan goal to ensure that Americans and only Americans determine the outcome of our elections, not fear-mongering.
The answer is no, and this is the ultimate proof that what the U.S. is doing through the National Endowment for Democracy is wrong. The U.S. knows that it's wrong. The U.S. doesn't care. They don't care that other nations are having this done to them, while the U.S. itself would never tolerate it being done to them. Now, Angelo, that quote you just referenced to Carl Gershman, this comes from New York Times, Missionaries for Democracy, U.S. Aid for Global Pluralism. Again, like the whole headline makes no sense. Democracy is self-determination. There's no way you can promote self-determination in another country except by keeping your hands off of it. That's the only way you could do it. The other problem with the National Endowment for Democracy is the people who are running it. I mean, it says the National Endowment for Democracy, but the people running it are pro-war, pro-regime change. Some of them are literal criminals, and others are directly involved in some of the worst crimes against humanity of the 21st century. And you can just go to the NED's website, board of directors. Damon Wilson comes over from the Atlantic Council, is a NATO pro-war think tank funded by arms manufacturers. Now he's running the NED. The board of directors, the first name on the list is Elliot Abrams. And Elliot Abrams is a criminal. He's a convicted criminal who had to get a presidential pardon. If you're going to tell me that the NED is promoting freedom and democracy, but then there's a character like Elliot Abrams on the board of directors, you have to show me how he represents freedom and democracy rather than someone simply hiding behind these notions to do something else. Let's read about Elliot Abrams from The Guardian, 2019. U.S. diplomat convicted over Iran-Contra appointed special envoy for Venezuela. So even before we get going, he has been involved more recently in trying to overthrow both the Iranian government and the Venezuelan government. And his goal is to promote this man named Juan Guaido, who the U.S. just picked and declared president of Venezuela. He wasn't elected. Nobody voted for him. They just declared him president of Venezuela. Abrams is widely remembered in Central America, but particularly from his time in the Reagan administration when he tried to whitewash a massacre of 1,000 men, women, and children by U.S.-funded death squads in El Salvador when he was Assistant Secretary of State for Human Rights. Abrams also helped organize the covert financing of Contra rebels in Nicaragua behind the back of Congress, which had cut off funding. He then lied to Congress about his role twice. He pleaded guilty to both counts in 1991, but was pardoned by George H.W. Bush. Why would the NED have somebody like this on their board of directors if their mission was actually to promote democracy and defend human rights? Next, we have Ambassador Victoria Nuland. Victoria Nuland was key in overthrowing the elected government of Ukraine. She's also on the board of directors. Her affiliation is Center for a New American Security. And if you go and you look at the list of the people who fund this organization, it's all weapon companies like Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, Raytheon. It's also big banks like Citigroup, Bank of America, Goldman Sachs. It's also giant oil companies like ExxonMobil. These are not companies that come to mind when we think about advancing human rights and democracy. These are companies and organizations that come to mind when we think of those who abuse and suppress democracy and human rights the most around the globe. And Victoria Nuland's actual public life, her service, included this from Reuters. Leaked audio reveals embarrassing U.S. exchange on Ukraine, EU. This article is from 2014. This was when the U.S. was overthrowing the Ukrainian government. An audio clip was revealed that had her handpicking the government they wanted to replace, weighing in on the makeup of the next Ukrainian government. So here is just another example of someone on the board of directors of the National Endowment for Democracy involved in regime change in another country around the globe. There's also people like Scott Carpenter on the board of directors. They even admit in his bio on the NED website that he was Director of Governance for the Coalition Provisional Authority in Iraq from April 2003 to July 2004. He was like a modern day viceroy, this white guy walking around Iraq as part of some interim government. This government was what the U.S. set up after the illegal invasion of Iraq based on a deliberately untrue pretext, mass murdered over 1 million Iraqis. They're still in Iraq to this day. They completely destroyed and destabilized the country to this day. And Scott Carpenter was running around Iraq, running the government after they killed, captured, or drove out the actual Iraqi government. But before they handpicked a client regime to take its place, people like Scott Carpenter were running things. So he was directly involved in one of the worst crimes against humanity of the 21st century. People getting money from the NED, that is who they're taking their money from.
We have George Weigel. He's on the board of directors. This is his 2003 article, The Just War Case for the War. This is about trying to promote the illegal U.S. invasion of Iraq in 2003. He says, I believe that a compelling case can be made for using proportionate and discriminate armed force to disarm Iraq. Of course, disarm Iraq of chemical and biological weapons that the U.S. even at the time knew Iraq didn't have. It was a lie that served as a pretext for an illegal invasion that killed 1 million people and has left the country in chaos ever since. We also have Senator Tim Kaine. He's also on the board of directors of the National Endowment for Democracy, and he has been promoting war in Syria. And here is another statement by Tim Kaine on his official website, complaining about the U.S. withdrawing its troops from its illegal invasion of Syria.
Who's next? Anne Applebaum. And I picked her. I mean, we could do this for every single board of director member, but I picked her because of the immense conflict of interest here. She was at the Washington Post. She was on the board of directors of the National Endowment for Democracy. And she's also an advisor of NED-funded fronts. So here they talk about her being at the Washington Post. Here's the gray zone talking about Coda Story. Coda Story is funded by the NED. They've lied about being funded by the NED, but it's ridiculous because even on the NED's own website, they talk about Coda Story and how they fund it. So it's just ridiculous. And here, NED grantees win European Press Prize. If you use Wayback Machine, you will find this Coda Story. It's right there. And she was on the board of advisors of Coda Story. She's right there. So do you see how this is a huge conflict of interest? Do you see why the Washington Post will lie about regime change in, say, someplace like Thailand? It's because the people at the Washington Post are also literally the same people at the National Endowment for Democracy funding regime change and benefiting from it. This is a huge conflict of interest. So again, no ethics at all. And this is who people are taking money from when they take NED money. So this is the National Endowment for Democracy supporting freedom around the world. And on the board of directors, you have war criminals, actual criminals, and people involved in overthrowing elected governments. You know, it doesn't add up unless you understand that the National Endowment for Democracy is a regime change organization hiding behind the idea of promoting freedom and democracy. And the organizations that it funds are funded to achieve regime change, to coerce governments, to undermine them, to overthrow them. That's what the NED does.
So there you have it. These are the people that the Thai opposition is taking money from. These are people who are involved in the worst crimes against humanity of the 21st century. They hide behind ideas like democracy, protecting human rights around the globe, when they're actually the ones who are attacking democracy and destroying human rights around the globe. So please keep this in mind. Just remember, the protest leaders went from denying that they were getting U.S. government funding to making excuses for receiving U.S. government funding. Now we have to look at who these organizations are, what they're really doing around the globe, and what that means for Thailand, because these people have been involved in the destruction of Iraq, Syria, Libya, Afghanistan, Yemen. They've also been behind the riots in Hong Kong. They helped overthrow the government in Ukraine. They're involved in unrest in Venezuela. They've been trying to undermine and overthrow the government of Iran for decades. What do you think their plan is for Thailand? Do you think Thailand is the first country that they've come to that they actually want to help and improve?
It's very important to understand this. The NED is telling these people who take their money what to do. They're not independent at all. That no one is just going to give you money and have no expectation at all
on what you're going to do with it, especially the US government. We've talked about almost all of these, and there's some that are not listed, and some where it's like Union for Civil Liberty gets money from the NED, and then they give it out to a bunch of other groups like Thai Lawyers for Human Rights, which is literally leading the anti-government protests right now. Thai Poor Act gets together groups of people and sends them to protests to build up the number of protesters. So when they say the protesters aren't being funded by the NED, maybe they're not each receiving money, but there are organizers that are funded by the NED.
And it's not just the senseless death and destruction, it's also the obstruction of human progress that the US is involved with as it pursues this policy. This is one of the most explicit examples of the US using terrorism to advance US foreign policy objectives around the globe. When you understand what the US is doing in Pakistan, the type of terrorism that they are sponsoring and supporting, and to block human development, badly needed infrastructure by deeply impoverished people, when Moscow suggests the US may have been behind the terrorist attacks there, it doesn't seem so far-fetched.
Where there seems to be the implication that National Endowment for Democracy is somehow linked to the CIA or part of the CIA, or I forget what the exact language was. It was like a cutout of the CIA. I'm not really even sure what that means. And I just wanted to reach out and ask you where you guys are getting that, because we're not part of the CIA.
We've seen the NED sponsor groups that toppled elected governments or sought to topple elected governments. And I would point to the Maidan events in 2013, 2014 as a perfect example of that. So how is it pro-democracy to support mobilizations that seek to remove elected leaders?
Isn't that sort of what democracy is?
Like on January 6th.
I was a government major like 30 years ago, but it does remind, I do believe that people demand change in their government. That's sort of the isn't that democracy?
Through elections?
When you overthrow a government, an elected government by violent means, that's called a coup d'etat.
Okay. I'm not going to pretend that I know the ins and outs of every single one of these scenarios that you have laid forward for me. I'm not a country expert in those places, but I will tell you that NED is not part of the CIA. And we don't support or condone violence. And it's hard for me to think of how I will go back and look at the statute that created us. I'm not sure if there's any specific, I just know how we work and what we do and who I work with every day. And there's no CIA agents around the office.
This is from state.gov, and this is the Office of the Historian. These are official US government documents. This is from 1964, just to give you an idea of how long this has been going on. And this is Review of Tibetan Operations, and it's talking about the CIA Tibetan activity. And they're talking about the Dalai Lama in this document. And it is this because he's really old. This was him. They're talking about him in these documents.
The NED became an international vehicle for the neoconservative agenda.
It's good to have you all here to help celebrate the launching of a program with a vision and a noble purpose.
Over the years, the NED and its partner organizations have largely served the interests of right-wing, free market parties and corporate interests around the globe.
In Central America. From ABC, this is World News Tonight with Peter Jennings.
Good evening. For 10 years, the U.S. supported the military attempt to overthrow the Sandinista government in Nicaragua. It never succeeded. Today, the Sandinista government has been overthrown at the ballot box.
Since then, the NED has advanced U.S. interests in countless countries. It helped swing a Russian election for Boris Yeltsin in 1996. It drove a failed coup attempt in Venezuela in 2002. It orchestrated a successful one in Haiti in 2004, and another one in Ukraine in 2014, which paved the way for neo-Nazis to move into the political mainstream.
It's the coup of February 22nd, 2014 that's of enormous importance. That's what really throws the crisis into gear. Just think about that word, coup. Orange Revolution, promoting democracy, the coup, February 22nd, 2014.
So this is from The Guardian, 2004, U.S. campaign behind the turmoil in Kiev. So before the 2014 overthrow of the elected government of Ukraine, sponsored openly by the United States. The US tried previously in 2004. And this is what The Guardian says. It says the campaign is an American creation, a sophisticated and brilliantly conceived exercise in Western branding and mass marketing. I just was talking about marketing. That in 4 countries in 4 years has been used to try to salvage rigged elections and topple unsavory regimes. So this is not The Guardian exposing this. This is The Guardian celebrating US interference across Eastern Europe. Funded and organized by the US government, deploying US consultancies, pollsters, diplomats, the 2 big American parties, and US non-governmental organizations. The campaign was first used in Europe in Belgrade in 2000 to beat Slobodan Milosevic at the ballot box. So they interfered in elections there in 2000.
That the National Endowment for Democracy, if there is a peace treaty, that they should cease funding civil society groups that seek a transition or regime change.
No, I don't know that that's what they do, but I do know that they promote human rights wherever they.
I mean, for example, if Russia were funding civil society groups inside the U.S.
I'm not going into any hypotheticals. I support the work they do.
America remains obsessed with the specter of Russian interference and Moscow's supposed active measures against our political system.
2024, Navalny's death raises tensions between US and Russia. This is via WikiLeaks. This is a cable, a US State Department cable from November 2006, a guide to Russian political youth groups, part 1 of 2. They talk all about DA, or Democratic Alternative. It says, DA, Maria Gedar, daughter of former Prime Minister Igor Gedar, leads DA, Democratic Alternative. She is ardent in her promotion of democracy, but realistic about the obstacles she faces. Gedar said that DA is focused on nonpartisan activities designed to raise political awareness. She has received funding from the National Endowment for Democracy. So she is getting funded by the US government through the NED.
The U.S. wants to be in a situation that no government in the world opposes U.S. policies on anything, whether it's on economics or natural resource disposition or locations of pipelines or, of course, locations of military forces or governments that might tax U.S. companies. Anything that the U.S. would oppose, the U.S. wants a subservient government. That's what hegemony means. Hegemony means that you have a government that will do the U.S. bidding. And this is carried out basically by the archipelago of U.S. military forces around the world. It's estimated at between 800 and 900 military bases in 80 countries of the world. So the U.S. Basically, even in effect, occupies many of these countries. It seems strange, but when you have the U.S. military bases there, the governments are afraid to move against the U.S., often for some pretty obvious reasons, but even friendly or allied governments, even Japan, they're afraid of the U.S. And it's a strange idea. It seems like an alliance, but it's not quite like that. So the U.S. wants to make sure that no one crosses the U.S. And what this means is that any large country is inherently an affront to U.S. hegemony. And 2 in particular right now, but there's a third one that will come this way, are affronts to the U.S. Russia's too big for the U.S. and China's too big for the U.S. And so we hate them. We hate them because everything they do, we interpret in a way to generate the public hatred and fear. And so this is, by the way, out of the playbook of the British Empire, which was really the tutor of the American Empire, because Britain did all of this in the 19th century, what the United States started doing in the second half of the 20th century. Britain came to hate Russia in the 1840s. So much so that when Russia got into a tiff with the Ottoman Empire in 1850, the Brits stepped forward and said, time to invade Russia. And that was the Crimean War, which was 1853 to 1856. Very similar dynamics. By the way, this is the second Crimean War. It's almost to the playbook, because the idea of the first Crimean War was surround Russia in the Black Sea, deny Russia's access to its naval base in Sevastopol. Same story as today. Same words you hear from MI6, from the British, from the Ukrainians. We're going to attack Crimea. It's exactly the repeat of 1853. But what was the reason for Russophobia of Britain in the 1840s? Well, it wasn't communism. It wasn't Putin. It wasn't any of that. It was Russia was so big that it was an affront to British hegemony. And the crazy idea back in the 1840s, which moved public opinion, was the idea that Russia was going to invade India from Central Asia through the Khyber Pass in Afghanistan and take over Britain's crown jewel of empire. Of course, completely fantastical. It had absolutely nothing to do with what the czars wanted to do, with what Russia was capable or wanted to do, but it drove war. And this is what we have today, which is America asserts its right of control over everybody. They call it literally primacy or full spectrum dominance, or we call it hegemony. But whichever term one uses, the countries that are an affront to that are the enemy. And I mentioned that there's a third one. Right now, the U.S. is angling that India will be on our side against China. But India is a big civilization and country, and you can pretty much imagine the U.S. Coming to see India as this great threat. Not today, 10 years, 20 years. It's a dynamic which is absolutely awful. And by the way, just to put the scholarly gloss on it, John Mearsheimer, whom I'm very good friends with and I admire a lot but disagree with very strongly on a core principle, wrote a book called The Tragedy of Great Power Politics. It's his great realist foreign policy book of 2001. And he wrote at the beginning, we have good relations with China right now, but they will worsen. And he called it, by the way. You know, he called it entirely. I said at the time, why should they worsen? We have no trouble. No, they're going to worsen. Why are they going to worsen? Because China is going to become a major power. I said, yeah, okay, so right. No, because then they'll worsen, because then it's going to be a threat. He said, John, it's not a threat unless we make it a threat. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. He said, yeah. Right. I said, John, we got to stop the self-fulfilling prophecy. He says, you can't. So that's the difference of the realist and me, is I believe we could actually talk with each other and find peaceful approaches. But the point is, hegemony means we control what we want to control, where we want to control it. We control which governments operate. If a government is not to our taste, we replace it with war or with a covert regime change operation or some other subterfuge of the National Endowment of Democracy or some NGO that does the politics for us. That's what hegemony means. And then a few weeks ago, just to finish this bizarre world, a New York Times editor reached out to me and said, you know, we'd be interested in your thoughts about Pakistan and the Pakistan elections. Okay, so I wrote, I think shouldn't have been surprising for them that it wasn't a great idea for the U.S. to help to overthrow Imran Khan. Yeah. Oh, Mr. Sachs, we can't have that in our pages. And so, okay, this is how it is.
It's sort of like, we only get the U.S. government to admit to taking part in coups 50 years after the fact. So, for example, the CIA coup in Iran in 1953, we're still learning about that. So I figured that the New York Times probably is on the same pace. As soon as the U.S. government finally admits something, 50 years later, they'll let you write about it. So in 50 years, Professor Sachs, I'm sure we'll be getting your op-eds on you.
I've got my piece already,
Okay, great.
No, it's so amazing, by the way. It's fascinating. We need to dissect this whole term of covert operations, because they're basically in broad daylight. Covert doesn't mean hidden. Covert just means denied in full view. And so we have repeatedly events like coups and overthrows and blowing up pipelines, and they just say, "No, didn't happen." I'll tell you another example of this. I was briefly, I was friends with the Aristide in Haiti, and I briefly was trying to help him in an absolutely impoverished place that needs help. And he said to me, "Jeff, they're going to take me out. They're going to take me out." And I said, "Oh, no, Mr. President, relax. We're going to take care of this." Pretty stupid and naive, I have to say, of myself. But I said, no, it's okay. We're going to work this out, and so forth. Well, then, of course, this is George W. Bush Jr. They cut off Haiti from IMF, World Bank, all the usual things for destabilization before the CIA finally moves in, often literally for the kill, or at least figuratively for the kill in the overthrow. Then one day, the U.S. ambassador walks in and guides Aristide out to a plane with the unmarked tail, and 23 hours later, he's in Central Africa. Okay, this is what is known as a coup, a CIA coup. So I know the reporter that covers this beat in the New York Times, and I call her, and I said the next day, "You're not going to cover the coup." They walked the president out to an unmarked tail, fly him out to Central. You're not. And she said, "Jeff, the editor's not interested." That's all the news that's fit to print.
Yeah.
And then I was, America is a surreal place. The next Monday or Tuesday, I was testifying in Congress on a hearing where everyone was saying how they loved Haiti and would do everything, and how good it was that the U.S. had protected the president of Haiti from harm's way because there were belligerents that were coming to attack him. And then, of course, everything is completely forgotten in the next hour, and that's the end of it. Yeah. So this is typical for how things act right now. And if you act with this impunity, if there is no accountability, the recklessness, the stupidity, really the imbecility of it continues to expand. And that's where we are today. And it's extraordinarily dangerous because not only are we doing terrible things, but we're doing delusional things. Like Blinken saying, we are going to make sure that NATO enlarges to Ukraine as hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians are dying on the battlefield. And we have no way, plan, shape, or decency. I mean, the whole idea is mistaken, but no way to do that. But what we are doing is guaranteeing that the war will continue.
And by the way, just speaking of Haiti, the 20th anniversary of that coup was just in February, and we're still learning about it. France's ambassador at the time, recently, a few years ago, admitted that France and the U.S. orchestrated that coup against Aristide. And by the way, that was the second time Aristide was overthrown in a U.S.-backed coup.
Yeah, and by the way, I was at diplomatic gatherings where people were bragging about this afterwards. The Belgians, the French, laughing about this stuff.
And look at Haiti now. It's descended into such absolute chaos, and yet nobody can trace it back to our critical role in destabilizing the country by overthrowing its first popularly elected president.
you look all around the world, these actions destabilize places for decades, for generations. They're based on violence, imbecility, and lies. They suborn local leaders. They distort everything about local politics. And of course, there's zero accountability for the United States. And the legacy of this, look at Brzezinski's brilliant move of putting jihadists into Afghanistan in 1979. We're still now 45 years later, a country completely destroyed for 2 generations, almost no understanding in the United States at all, almost no connecting the dots of how this CIA operation back in 1979 has led step by step by step to unending chaos. Look at Iran, which you mentioned, 1953, overthrowing a democratically elected government because somehow, weirdly, our oil had gotten under their sand, as they say. We've done this in so many places. And the legacy of it, Libya, Syria, more recently, Ukraine is the same way. It poisons politics, even for generations, because it's violent, it's so stupid in its direction, so arrogant and wrong-headed. It's done covertly, so-called, because what is being done is so far from what should be done that it's hidden and deniable from view. And so it's horrible policies done in a way guaranteed to poison the politics of these places for decades. You know, when I go to Southeast Asia, which is quite frequently, there are places today lots of places you do not walk because the unexploded ordnance of America's secret wars are all over the farmlands in Laos and Cambodia until today. The US government, by the way, is still trying to collect debt from a regime that had installed in place, destabilized the entire country, lent it money for emergency food aid, bombed the place relentlessly, and is trying to get repaid till today.
This gets back to my point about democracy promotion. We believe democracy promotion is an unalloyed good, and we can't understand why people like Putin and the leaders in Beijing don't understand this, but they don't understand it. And if you don't recognize what other people think, you're incapable of putting yourself in their shoes, you're going to get yourself into a heck of a lot of trouble. And of course, that's exactly what happened here.